Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to discuss something that may not otherwise be discussed this year in this Congress, the wretched state of racial relations in America today. We passed a bill here about a month ago in the House of Representatives to eliminate the term Oriental from the law books. I submit that eliminating a term does not eliminate the racism that embodies that term. And I think it's about time that we recognize what this problem is, the fact that it still festers in America, and give some thought about what we can do about it. I want to begin by relating two stories, both from my home state of Florida. First one involves a 16-year-old girl. She's white. She had an encounter with police officers who were also white. She lived on the Atlantic coast, which is largely white. And I heard about this from a friend of a friend. What happened to her is that her parents got a call from the police officers late one night. They didn't tell her why they were calling, but they said, "You have to come to this location. We need to talk to you about your daughter. She's here with us." Mother went to that location, spoke to the white police officers. They informed her that her daughter had been drinking in a car with her boyfriend, and they needed to take her home. She was shaken up a bit, so was the daughter, but everybody ended that night alive. Now I want to tell you a different story. Didn't end so nicely. This was on the Gulf Coast, the coast of Florida that is heavily African American. And on the Gulf Coast one night, there was a theme park, you could call it a fairgrounds, that was open to all students without having to pay. They could go on the rides, enjoy themselves, one day each year. This is done in Tampa. Now, teenagers being teenagers, some of them got a little bit out of hand. Many African Americans frequent that area. And they were out in force that night at the fairgrounds, and there was a great deal of friction that night between the white police force and the African-American teenagers who were there that night. Some of them actually started running around, might have bumped into a few other people as they were running around. Some of them started to scream. You'll notice that apart from that physical contact, nothing that I described is actually against the law. Like, for instance, drinking in a car with your boyfriend when you're 16 years old. A number of them, about 100 of African-American youths, were arrested that night 2 years ago in Tampa. The white police officers insisted that they strip to the waist. That apparently was for the purpose, in the minds of the police officers, to see whether they had gang colors on their bodies. At least that's what they said. Now, one of them, Andrew Joseph III, he actually hadn't done any of that running around, any of that screaming, any of that casual bumping. He hadn't done any of that. But he saw his classmates being arrested, came to see what was going on, saw that one of them had his hat fall off his head. Went over and he picked it up. Officer said, "I didn't say you could do that." So they arrested him for picking up his friend's hat. They took Andrew Joseph, a 14-year-old boy, 2 miles away from the fairgrounds, and they pushed him out of the police car and said, "You are on your own." A 14-year-old boy who has parents who were reachable by a telephone. They pushed him out of a neighborhood he'd never seen before, never been to before, had no idea where he was. He remembered that his father was going to pick him up at the fairgrounds. He felt pretty shaken up because he'd just been arrested, and he's told to strip to the waist, and frankly, felt humiliated. So he found his way as best he could back to the fairgrounds 2 miles away. Didn't call his parents because, frankly, he was scared, embarrassed, didn't want them to know. Almost got as far as the fairgrounds, tried to cross the interstate highway to get to the fairgrounds. In the midst of traffic in both directions, was struck by a car, died right on the spot immediately. One 16-year-old girl, white, alive today. One 14-year-old boy, African-American, dead. This is his picture. Andrew Joseph III. This is what this boy looked like. He's a good student, quite an athlete, had a wonderful future ahead of him. But, not being white, his parents didn't get a call that night to say, come pick him up. I submit to you, this is not just one person's tragedy. It's not just the tragedy of these parents. Standing at his gravesite. It's the tragedy of America. We persist in being a country of sometimes casual racism. Racism that sometimes goes unnoticed. If you say a bad word that begins with the letter N, and there happens to be a recording device nearby, you will certainly be scolded and to some degree held accountable. That much is true. But institutionalized racism, racial profiling, redlining, it's not treated the same way because it's just too hard. It's much like the concept that if we close our eyes to it, it will somehow disappear. A 1-year-old, maybe a 2-year-old might think that way, but a country of 330 million? Why do we ever think that way? Now, I wish I could tell you that this story somehow had a happy ending. It doesn't. This kind of institutionalized racism goes on today. I asked the FBI to investigate whether there is racial profiling by the police force in Tampa. They're thinking about it. I don't know if they're going to say yes or they're going to say no. Can't tell for sure. That's their decision, not mine. And I remember when I was a boy, a great man said he hoped to see a day in America where his 4 children were judged not by the color of their skin, but by their character. I submit to you, this boy was judged by the color of his skin. And he's not the only one. We live in America today, a country where 29% of white adults have college degrees, 18% of African Americans have college degrees. If Andrew Joseph III had lived, then his chance of getting a college degree would have been stunted, perhaps even forbidden, by the color of his skin. Now, if he had lived, whether or not he'd gone to college, he would have grown up in a country where African Americans like him have an average household income of $37,000. Whites have an average income of $57,000. The color of his skin, you could say, if he'd lived, would have cost him $20,000 a year. That's our new poll tax, $20,000 a year. And if he'd managed to get across that highway, if he'd managed to be picked up safely by his father that night, whom you see here on my right, then as an African American male, his life expectancy would have been 73 years. The life expectancy of white males in this country, including me, is 78 years. Now, it's a great tragedy, a great, great tragedy, that we stole 50 years of life from this one boy. But how much greater a tragedy is it that we steal 5 years of life from 40 million? We are in danger at this point of becoming a society that is not colorblind, not blind to color, but rather a country that is blind to racism. There is an easy way to end this problem. It's called doing something about it. It's called pulling ourselves together in the same way that we began to do in the 1960s, acknowledging these differences and then remedying them. I well recall that in the current presidential election, the former governor of my state, Jeb Bush, spent $125 million in his campaign, got 4 votes, convention votes. But I remember that it never came up that Jeb Bush wiped out, destroyed, eliminated, blew up affirmative action in my state of Florida. And now it's gone. So the question before us is, writ small, how do we acknowledge that Black lives matter? How do we acknowledge that a terrible tragedy took place here and robbed this good young man of his life? And writ large, what do we finally do, finally, 50 years after the Civil Rights Movement began, to end inequality in this country? End it. It starts with justice, and it ends with equality. Not just the pablum of equality of opportunity, that buzz phrase that we use in order to solve our consciences, but rather the equality of results. An America where an African-American boy is just as likely to go to college as a white boy. An America where an African-American is just as likely to earn as much money as a white. And for God's sake, an African-American can live as long as a white man does. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman have a motion?
Can we go off? Can I step away from the microphone, please?
Yes. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until